Hey folks, George here. This time we're going to talk about William W. Murdoch's and Allan Oaten's article, A Critique of Lifeboat Ethics. This is a direct response to Garrett Hardin's article, Living on a Lifeboat. Murdoch and Oaten start this article right away by just saying that Hardin is wrong. It's obvious that rich countries should help poor countries. Here's what I like about Murdoch and Oaten's article, though, and their argument. They acknowledge that Hardin is right about some things. He's not completely wrong. Some of his conclusions, most of his conclusions are wrong. But Murdoch and Oaten have to acknowledge that Hardin is right about a few things. One thing he's right about is that unhindered population growth is bad for everywhere, for countries, for the world, for everybody. However, his ideas, Hardin's ideas, lead to terrible and agonizing deaths. Hardin and his ideas only make sense if we follow strict, brutal rationality. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but what's interesting here is that Murdoch and Oaten acknowledge sometimes there's more to philosophy. Sometimes there's more to life than strict, brutal rationality. They start their attempt at dismantling Hardin's idea by saying his lifeboat metaphor is simplistic and it obscures very important issues. Here are 4 problems, according to Murdoch and Oaten, about Hardin's lifeboat metaphor. Number 1, rich lifeboats have contributed to the poor conditions in poor countries. What they're saying is that colonization, the histories of colonization, the history of commerce and capitalist exploitation, and trade tariffs and cash crops, and the support of corrupt governments by those rich countries has contributed to the terrible conditions in these poor countries. Number 2, the real world really does have enough food to feed everyone adequately, counter to Hardin's idea that food is terribly scarce. Number 3 problem is that, yes, Hardin, you're right, there are less than ideal birth rates in some of these poor countries. However, these are related to a lot of different social conditions that we have to address. Number 4, this is a big problem for Murdoch and Oaten. In the real world, poor countries have bad effects when they have emergencies. They do affect even rich countries. Some examples of this are terrorism, war, the squandering of raw materials, and global instability. Murdoch and Oaten have a direct response to Hardin's idea about the tragedy of the commons. Here's where Hardin is wrong. He's making a false dichotomy between common ownership and private ownership, as though those are the only 2 choices. But, Murdoch and Oaten say, there are other options. One option is communal ownership, communal planning, i.e. democracy, right? i.e. democracy. Another idea is cooperative ownership with regulations and international treaties, such as whaling and fishing, responding directly to Hardin's problem regarding diminishing fish stocks in the world's oceans. Yes, we can take cooperative ownership and create treaties about how much to fish, for example. Here's Murdoch and Oaten's response to Hardin's problem around birth rates. Hardin says, yeah, these poor countries have terrible birth rates and they're overpopulated. They're having too many children in those terribly poor countries, too many children that they can't support. Here's Murdoch and Oaten's response. This is related to terribly complicated social conditions. Not just food supply, but all sorts of social conditions. Some of those social conditions are the status of women, infant mortality rates, health care, income, schools, inequality. All of those things contribute to less than ideal birth rates. This has been and can be improved in the developing world. So, here's where Murdoch and Oaten kind of agree with Hardin. where Hardin said we need to encourage those countries to improve their countries. Murdoch and Oaten agree. They say, you know what, we should teach and help these countries implement better family planning policies. Rich countries should help those poor countries educate their people. And we should help improve healthcare in those countries. And we should help them with food. After all, they need to eat too. But even more, we can help them with food production. And that is something that Hardin agreed to. He said we need to help economic development. He says perhaps you could send grain, you could send fertilizer so that they could grow their own crops and grow their own food. We could send and train and teach better land cultivation and irrigation to nurture food production in those countries. By the way, Murdoch and Oaten are sharp here. Rich countries can afford to do this. This isn't like rich countries are a struggling lifeboat in the middle of the ocean. This is a point that Murdoch and Oaten raised earlier. I'm repeating myself. Rich countries are not immune from the problems in poor countries. Therefore, rich countries should help poor countries. Why? Because that instability in those poor countries might have a trickle effect and cause terrible problems in the rich countries. Hardin was right about the levels of corruption in the developing countries that make all of this very difficult. But that behooves and obligates the rich countries to learn how to give more effectively. And these are some ideas that Murdoch and Oaten suggest to bolster food aid and monetary aid. Also, yes, Hardin, you might have been right about that. Give economic development, give education, healthcare, scientific development as well. But food is important too. We need to stop agonizing deaths. I hope that helped us better understand a lot of Murdoch's and Oaten's response to Hardin's harsh lifeboat ethics. See you next time. Bye-bye.